Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for Sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso. So today we'll be taking a look at a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. You can find the link to the sutta in the live chat. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in. So good morning so far to Geeta and Jhāna, Ian, Peter, Robin, Melody, Yan, Sarah, and Miguel. So good to see so many friends this morning. And I'll pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso for this morning's talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning. I think that's good evening for Melody in Malaysia. So good evening if you're on the other side of the world. Good morning if you're on this side of the world. So this morning we'll be looking at the Panchangika Sutta, so Anguttara Nikaya 5.28, which is translated here as 5 aspects. So this is a sutta about Samādhi, which is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about Samādhi. And this sutta was specifically requested by Aya Soma, as it's one that she was interested in. So that also means that anybody can suggest suttas, though I may or may not take your suggestions, but you can still make suggestions. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give some explanations. And then at the end, we can have some discussion. So please feel free to type in questions at any time, and I'll answer them at the end. The sutta begins. This is the Buddha speaking. Monks, I will teach the development of noble right samadhi with 5 aspects. Listen to this and carefully pay attention. I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those monks replied to the fortunate one. The fortunate one said this. Monks, what is the development of right samadhi with 5 aspects? So noble right samadhi with 5 aspects, which is an interesting term. So normally the Buddha simply says samma samadhi, so right samadhi, right concentration. But on this occasion, he specifies noble right samadhi, which is not an expression we normally come across. So the distinction here is that the term noble means related to enlightenment, related to awakening. So whenever we see that word Arya in a Buddhist context, it means related to enlightenment or awakening. So the Buddha continues. Here, monks, isolated from sensuality and from unwholesome things, a monk attains and dwells in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thought, mental transience, and the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. So this should be familiar to people who have some familiarity with the suttas. This is a standard definition of the first stage of jhana. So jhana is an experience of very strong, stable samadhi. So samadhi is when the mind is unified. It's focused, it's collected, it's not scattered or distracted at all. In the development of samadhi, one is cultivating a mind which is very alert and very stable, very aware, yet very peaceful. So the first jhana is the first time when we start to get really stable samadhi. So whenever we sit down to practice meditation and we focus the mind on our meditation object, then we'll start to get a little bit of samadhi. The mind will start to collect and stabilize a little bit. And as we continue to practice, then that samadhi becomes increasingly stable. The mind wanders less. The mind is more present, more sharp, more clear, more bright. And one of the critical elements for developing samadhi is to let go of thoughts of sensuality, to let go of desire for any kind of sensual experience. So the very first thing the Buddha says in the cultivation of jhana is to be isolated from sensuality. So he's talking here about a mental isolation. So we have a physical body, so sensuality is actually never far from us. It's always right here with this body. But in practicing samadhi, we are isolating the mind from sensuality. So we're not participating in any kind of sensual impulses at all. And he also says isolated from unwholesome things. So this is a more broad term, akusala dhamma, unwholesome things. So this is commonly taken to mean every other defilement besides sensuality. So one of the main formulations when talking about samadhi is that samadhi is freeing the mind of the 5 hindrances while focusing on an object. So sensual desire is one of the 5 hindrances. So the other 4 would fit under the term unwholesome things, akusala dhamma. So that's aversion, dullness, agitation, and skepticism. Those are the other 4 unwholesome things, the other 4 obstructive factors. Then the characteristics of first jhana, so it's accompanied by thought and mental transience. So these are the terms that I chose on this occasion for translating vitakka and vichara. And in learning about jhana from various teachers, you will find the terms vitakka and vichara translated in many different ways. And there's a lot of debate about what these terms mean. So my own take on it, first off, the word vitakka, as used throughout the suttas in every context, vitakka means thought. So there's no reason for me to believe that it means anything else when the Buddha is talking about jhana. And the word vichara, vichara literally means wandering around, moving around. So I translated that here as mental transience. So this oscillation of mind or movement of mind. But what distinguishes the thought and mental transience of ordinary experience from the thought and mental transience present in first jhana is that in first jhana, those movements of mind are happening in the background and they do not distract us from our meditation object. So in ordinary daily experience, whenever a thought appears, we tend to move our attention to that thought. Or whenever there's some impulse or motion in the mind, we tend to be, we move our attention towards it. We tend to get caught up in it. But in first jhana, although there's still some background instability in the mind, there's still some background movement in the mind, we don't turn our attention away from our meditation object. We never lose focus on our meditation object. So one way I relate to this is that it's a bit like when there's a radio playing in the distance, or somebody having a conversation in the distance, where you hear it, but it's far away and you're not interested in it. So it's still there, but it doesn't grab your attention. Maybe you're reading a book that you really enjoy and somewhere far off, your next door neighbor is playing music that you don't actually particularly like. Well, your mind just doesn't go towards that music. You're fully engrossed in the book that you're reading. So in the same way in first jhana, there can still be some background movement of mind, some background noise in the mind, but we're much more interested in our meditation object, so we don't move towards that background noise. By contrast, when our samadhi is weak, then we put our mind on our meditation object, but the background noise is actually very interesting. So we keep moving attention to the background noise. We keep getting wrapped up in the background noise and losing our meditation object. But in first jhana, this is when we finally stabilized attention on our meditation object. So the background noise no longer pulls our attention away. But it's still there. And this is the way that one falls from first jhana, is by turning one's attention towards that background noise in the mind. The other two qualities which are listed here are euphoria and pleasure, so piti and sukha. And next the Buddha gives a simile to explain what this is like. So I'm going to read the simile and then speak about how we can relate the simile to the terms piti and sukha. So the Buddha says, he infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates this very body with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. There is nowhere in this body that is not saturated with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. Monks, just as a skilled bath attendant or apprentice bath attendant would put soap powder in a metal bowl, sprinkle it with water, and knead it such that the lump of soap would become moist, completely moist, saturated inside and out with moisture, but not dripping. In the same way, monks, a monk infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates this very body with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. There is nowhere in this body that is not saturated with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. Monks, this is the first development of noble right samadhi with 5 aspects. So the simile that the Buddha is giving here for the experience of piti and sukha, of euphoria and pleasure, that's present in first jhana, is like you have powder and you sprinkle water in it and you knead it and press it and rub it and mix it until the water is thoroughly saturated all through the powder. So in the same way, you can see that, so you can see there's a certain forcefulness and effort involved in pushing the moisture throughout the entire pile of powder until the whole pile of powder is completely moistened, completely saturated with moisture. So in the same way, as we're developing samadhi, even long before reaching the stage of first jhana, as we're developing samadhi, there can be a certain amount of pleasure that starts to arise in the body and mind, a certain experience of euphoria. So this electric, ecstatic feeling of pleasure in the body, accompanied by a deeply satisfying sense of happiness in the mind. And this actually appears very early in samadhi practice. But when it first appears, it's very weak, very mild, and very easy to overlook if we're not paying attention. But it's actually there from very early in the development of samadhi, long before reaching first jhana. There's some euphoria present. So one way of cultivating samadhi is to pay attention to that euphoria and make a conscious effort to bring it up more strongly and to push it through the whole body, to flood the whole body with it. So just as in the simile here, the bath attendant is pushing and spreading the water all through the pile of soap powder. In the same way, we're trying to spread euphoria all through the whole body so that the whole body feels luminous, like it's positively glowing with euphoria. And this is a way of accelerating one's development of samadhi. So this is how I interpret the simile of kneading water into the bath powder, is it's indicating that there's a strong volitional component to the development of first jhana. There's an effort involved. So some teachers talk about the practice of samadhi as being an effortless relaxing into it. And for some people that works. But for many people, it's useful to really try to push the mind into samadhi, to give it some momentum, some deliberate momentum. Then the next one, the Buddha says, next, monks, when there is pacification of thought and mental transience, accompanied by internal clarity and unification of mind, a monk attains and dwells in the second jhana, which is accompanied by neither thought nor mental transience, and has the euphoria and pleasure that arise from samadhi. So this is a deeper and more refined stage of samadhi. So in first jhana, so one has euphoria and pleasure that come from being free of coarse defilements. So a mind which is not caught up in desire and aversion and restlessness and agitation and doubt naturally has a certain amount of euphoria. So that's the euphoria and pleasure that arise from isolation. But in first jhana, the mind it still has that background noise. In second jhana, the background noise has faded. So this is what's meant by the pacification of thought and mental transience. That background noise in the mind, which was present in first jhana, fades away because we're no longer reifying it. We're no longer strengthening it. We're no longer participating in the production of mental noise. So the echoes start to fade away. Again, the way I relate to this is that in first jhana, although we're not producing mental noise any longer, the echoes of our past mental noise are still echoing in the mind. And that's vitaka vichara as present in first jhana. In second jhana, those echoes have faded away entirely. So the mind is silent. There's no echoes in the mind any longer. And that brings a great sense of clarity to the mind. The mind becomes very clear and precise in its knowing. And the mind also at this point is completely unified. Since there's no longer any background noise, the whole domain of the mind is fixated on the meditation object. There's nothing else going on in the mind. And the euphoria and pleasure are much stronger in second jhana because there's no longer anything that pulls the mind away from that experience of euphoria. So this is the euphoria that comes from unification of mind, samadhi. And again, the Buddha gives a simile. He says, he infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates this very body with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from samadhi. There is nowhere in this body that is not saturated with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from samadhi. Monks, it is like a deep lake that is filled by a spring. It does not have water flowing in from the east, west, north, or south, and there is not enough rain to maintain it. The cool water flowing up from the spring in that lake infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates the lake with cool water. There is nowhere in the lake that is not saturated with the cool water. In the same way, monks, a monk infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates this very body with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from samadhi. There is nowhere in this body that is not saturated with the euphoria and pleasure that arise from samadhi. So here, again, he's still using the simile of water. So in the first simile of first jhana, it's you're starting with dry soap powder. So dry powder, so that's the mind which has no samadhi and no euphoria. And you're pushing water into it. You're pushing the mind into this euphoric state of unity. But in the simile for second jhana, there's already a lake of water there. So there's already that euphoria that one cultivated in reaching first jhana. But there's no longer the forcefulness of trying to push moisture into it. The moisture simply flows naturally up from the spring at the bottom of the lake. And there's no water coming in from outside. So this is also indicating at this point the self-sustaining nature of samadhi. Once we get past the initial forceful stage of samadhi, then that's actually when you can relax into an effortless samadhi practice. You no longer have to force the mind to be unified and steady and bright. You just have to prevent it from falling away. You just have to protect it. But at that point, it's self-sustaining. So the water, again, in the simile, the water is flowing up from underground. So this sense of serenity, like this, the lake itself is very still and serene. but there is still this motion, this movement of cool water spreading throughout the whole lake. So that's also indicating that the euphoria that's present in second jhana is still not a completely peaceful experience. So it's more peaceful than in first jhana, but it's still not completely peaceful. There's still some motion, a little bit of turbulence. So just as the spring would create a little bit of turbulence in the lake, in the same way, the euphoria of second jhana also generates a little bit of turbulence in the mind. For one thing, it's exciting. So anyone who's had these experiences can attest to how exciting it is when it's like, oh, magnificent, delicious. And it is exciting. And that excitement generates a certain amount of agitation of its own. So this is why second jhana is still not the most peaceful state of mind. That presence of that bubbling euphoria creates turbulence in the mind. Then the next one, the Buddha says, next monks, when there is dispassion towards euphoria, while one remains mindful and fully aware and experiences pleasure with the body, what the noble call one who dwells equanimously, mindfully, and pleasantly, a monk attains and dwells in the third jhana. So this is the third state of deep samadhi. So this is when one starts to lose one's passion for euphoria. So one's excitement about the euphoria starts to fade away, and one becomes more interested in the serenity of mind. So with entering first jhana, one tends to automatically become obsessed and infatuated with that strong euphoria. It's great. It's like being really high, except without the drawbacks. So naturally, we get really excited and obsessed and infatuated with that euphoria. With second jhana, the euphoria becomes even stronger and clearer. But at some point, what we become interested in is the peacefulness of mind that accompanies the euphoria. And as our attention turns towards the peacefulness of mind, the euphoria naturally starts to fade away because we're no longer interested in it. We're interested in the peacefulness of mind, which the euphoria itself, as I mentioned, is actually shaking that serenity a little bit. It's a bit of an obstacle to the development of a deeper stability of mind. So this is what's meant by dispassion towards euphoria. We start to lose our obsession with the euphoria that's present in the earlier stages of samadhi. But we're still keeping mindfulness and full awareness. So this is very important. So this is not falling into a state of apathy. No, it's not a state of uncaring. We're still fully interested in the meditation, fully interested in the cultivation of samadhi. We're just no longer specifically interested in experiencing euphoria. But the mind remains very clear and aware. So this is moving into a more refined state of samadhi, which is still pleasant, as he mentions here. One is still experiencing pleasure with the body, but it doesn't have that turbulent, static excitement of the euphoria of first and second jhana. So the Buddha, again, gives a lovely simile. So he says, he infuses, suffuses, fills, and saturates this very body with non-euphoric pleasure. There is nowhere in this body that is not saturated with non-euphoric pleasure. Monks, it is like a lotus pond, where some lotuses sprout in the water and grow within the water, completely immersed in and nourished by the water. The lotuses are infused, suffused, filled, and saturated with cool water from their tips to their roots. And there is nowhere in those lotuses that is not saturated with cool water. So here in a simile, you can see that there's no longer any movement. There's no longer any motion. So the first simile, so pushing water into the powder, is very strong, clear, forceful movement. The second simile of water flowing up from the bottom of the lake It's a more peaceful movement, but it's still a movement. But in this one, the lotus immersed in water, there's no movement. The water is still there, but it's not moving anymore. So the water here is still symbolizing pleasure, but it's switching from the turbulent pleasure of euphoria to a serene, peaceful pleasure, a pleasure which is connected with a stable mind rather than an excited mind. Then the fourth stage of samadhi, the Buddha says, next, monks, when a monk abandons both pleasure and pain, elation and depression have previously disappeared, he attains and dwells in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and in which mindfulness and equanimity are completely pure. So this is the fourth jhana, so the fourth stage of samadhi. And in this one has one's priority is completely focused on mindfulness, equanimity, and samadhi. So one is no longer interested in experiencing ordinary pleasure. One is no longer interested in just having a nice time. Instead, one's priority is on mindfulness and equanimity. So having a completely clear, stable, pure awareness of mind. So dropping away even the agitation, that subtle agitation of the obsession with the pleasure of third jhana. Because that's still a form of desire, still a form of attachment. So the desire for the serene pleasure of third jhana is still beside the point, tangential to the goal of Buddhist practice. So we drop even that when we allow the mind to sink into complete equanimity, not pleasure seeking at all. And again, the Buddha gives a simile. He says, he sits having saturated this very body with a completely pure and clean mind. There's nowhere in this body that is not saturated by that completely pure and clean mind. Notice he's not talking about happiness anymore. He's not talking about euphoria and pleasure. He's talking about one's body and mind being completely pure and clean. So the mind is completely pure and clean, and that pure and clean mind is fully aware of the entire body. This is also important, by the way, because this clearly indicates that the body is still present through all four jhanas. The body doesn't disappear at any point during the practice of the four jhanas. Very important point. So you can practice mindfulness of the body all the way to fourth jhana. You never need to switch to anything else. You can just stick with the body all the way into fourth jhana. So some teachers say that, well, technically your body disappears before fourth jhana, but what persists is an after image of the body in the mind. But that's all just word games, because technically, even right now, you're just experiencing an image of your body in your mind. So it all amounts to saying the same thing anyway. And so the Buddha gives the simile. He says, monks, it is like a person who sits completely covered with a white cloth, including their head. There is nowhere on their body that is not covered by the white cloth. So in this case, the white cloth is symbolizing that completely pure and clean awareness. So awareness that is not tainted by desire for pleasure or aversion towards pain. Awareness which is completely stable and precise. So this is the fourth development of noble right samadhi with 5 aspects. So the first 4 aspects of noble right samadhi are the 4 jhanas. Then the 5th one, the Buddha says, next, monks, a monk has an object of examination which has been taken up well, paid attention to well, held well, and penetrated well with wisdom. Monks, it is like a person who examines another, or a standing person examines a sitting person, or a sitting person examines a reclining person. In the same way, monks, a monk has an object of examination which has been taken up well, paid attention to well, held well, and penetrated well with wisdom. So object of examination is pachavekana nimitta. So nimitta means an object that one is paying attention to, an object of awareness. Pachavekana, so it has the prefix pati, which means against or back or around. Ava, which means down, and ika, which means to look. So you're looking down and all around at something. So it has this sense of really thoroughly examining something, inside and out and all around, backwards and forwards, up and down, left and right. You're really like examining something. So this appears to be referring not to the still mind practice of samadhi, but rather to a moving mind meditation. When you're moving the mind through some kind of meditation exercise. So this also is a form of samadhi practice. So it's not as peaceful and serene as the jhana practice is, where one is developing a completely still mind. But it is more conducive to the development of insight. So the process of setting a field of examination and moving the mind within a carefully structured field of examination. This can be a very potent way of practicing meditation. And for many people, this is more accessible than still mind samadhi. So this moving mind samadhi, for some people, is an easier way to practice, depending upon one's karmic conditions. Then the Buddha says, monks, when a monk has developed an advanced noble right samadhi with 5 aspects in this way, if he inclines his mind towards anything which is to be realized through higher knowledge, it is possible that he will attain it when the circumstances are right. In other words, the Buddha is saying that when we cultivate samadhi, so practicing the jhanas, as well as getting proficiency with moving mental meditation, with using a process of examination, so both still mind samadhi and also examination meditation. When we've cultivated both of these styles in these 5 ways, then it's possible to cultivate higher knowledge. It's possible to cultivate liberating wisdom. It's possible to cultivate the insight that leads to full enlightenment. And the Buddha gives another simile. He says, monks, it is like a water jar that is full to the brim with water and set on a stand. If a strong person tips it in any direction, will water come out? And the monks say, yes, Bhante. The Buddha says, in the same way, monks, when a monk has developed an advanced noble right samadhi with 5 aspects in this way, if he inclines his mind towards anything which is to be realized through higher knowledge, it is possible that he will attain it when the circumstances are right. So again, you have a jar of water full to the brim. If you just tilt it even slightly, water comes out. In the same way, when we've really filled our samadhi practice, taken the time and effort to maximize our samadhi, then you don't actually have to put a lot of effort to get wisdom. You just push the mind a little bit towards insight, and the mind goes towards insight. Whereas when samadhi is weak, it's very difficult to get any significant results from insight meditation. But when samadhi is filled to the brim, then just a little push and you get wisdom. A little push and the insight comes. Doesn't take a lot of effort. The next simile, the Buddha says, monks, it is like a raised pond on level ground with embankments on 4 sides that is full to the brim with water. If a strong person releases any of the embankments, will water come out? And they say, yes, Bhante. So again, he's using the simile of water. So this is a simile of a raised pond full with water. So if you just release the embankment just a little bit, then water flows out. Again, it doesn't take much effort. It doesn't take much time. It happens almost instantaneously with very little effort. So in the same way, when our samadhi is well developed, just a little push and you get insight. Your wisdom practices will develop. The next simile, he says, monks, it is like a chariot on good terrain at a crossroads, with a high-quality horse yoked to it and a whip at the ready. If a skilled and capable charioteer gets in the chariot, takes the reins in his left hand and the whip in his right hand, he could set off in any direction that he wishes. In the same way, monks, when a monk has developed an advanced noble right samadhi, etc. So here again, he's indicating that with speed, one can direct one's mind towards any form of insight meditation. So here, once again, he's emphasizing that when samadhi is well developed, then you can do any kind of insight meditation you like, and it will leap to it just as quickly as a well-trained horse responds to the charioteer's whip. Then the Buddha gives a number of examples, and I'm not going to go into much detail on these because I went through it fairly recently in another sutta. So first he says, if he wishes, may manifest many kinds of psychic powers, etc. And he goes through the standard list of psychic powers. It is possible that he will attain it when the circumstances are right. So strong samadhi. With strong samadhi, you can develop psychic powers, like the Arhat Bhikkhuni Uplavana. Next, if he wishes with the divine ear element, which is pure and superhuman, may I hear both kinds of sounds, celestial and human, far and near. So you can develop clairaudience, the ability to hear both distant things and close things, angels and humans and spirits. You can talk with spirits of all sorts if you want to. Next, if he wishes, may I know the minds of other beings and other people using my own mind. So if you want to read minds, well, samadhi starts with samadhi. It all starts with samadhi. Next, if he wishes, may I remember many past lives. Yeah, remembering past lives also starts with samadhi. So you've got some doubts about past lives, you've got some doubts about this whole rebirth stuff. Well, then develop samadhi and put your mind towards it. And maybe you might just find that there's nothing to be doubtful about. Next, if he wishes with divine vision, which is pure and superhuman, may I see beings falling and reappearing. In other words, do you want to actually observe the process of karma and rebirth happening in other beings' lives? It's possible. The Buddha could do this. Many of his disciples could do this as well. And the foundation for it is samadhi. The foundation for it is cultivating this unified, focused, powerful mind. And finally, and most importantly, he says, if one wishes, with the elimination of my corruptions, may I attain and dwell in the corruption-free, wisdom-based mental liberation, having realized it with my own higher knowledge. It is possible that one will attain it when the circumstances are right. So this then is full enlightenment. Again, the Buddha is pointing out here that when we cultivate samadhi in these 5 ways, so the 4 jhanas, as well as examination practice, then we can incline the mind towards complete freedom from suffering. We can incline the mind towards the direct realization of truth, and it becomes accessible to us. It becomes within our reach. So that's the end of this sutta, sutta on samadhi. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and ask, and we'll have some more discussion about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So welcome to some more friends joining in. Liz, Ishan, Michael, and Elaine. Glad to see you all. And Gita and Jhāna has a question. Bhante, how can one skillfully catch the mind trying to take thoughts away from the meditation object? Would it be to establish mindfulness with clear comprehension?
Yeah, exactly. Briefly speaking, pay attention. The mind never sneaks up on you and just does something all by itself and then grabs you and takes you away, but rather you point your mind at something other than a meditation. So it's volitional, it's deliberate. We say things like, oh, that sound distracted me, but that's actually not a true statement. The truth is, we decided that sound was more interesting than our meditation. That's what really happened. And we say, oh, those thoughts distracted me. Again, not true. What happened was we decided those thoughts were more interesting than our meditation. That's what happened. So decide that your meditation is the most interesting thing in the entire world. Then you won't be distracted. And focus all your attention on a detailed, precise, intense experience of your meditation object. Then you won't get distracted. Again, the deliberate cultivation of euphoria, as I was talking about with first jhana, also helps, because then we're actually using our tendency towards obsession with pleasant experiences to support the development of samadhi. But ultimately, it just comes down to deciding that your meditation object is the most interesting thing in the entire universe. That's the real secret to samadhi practice. Okay.
A follow-up question is from Gita, when one observes a wonderful, bright mind with peace and some stillness, does one observe this and develop further stillness? How can one develop it further?
By cultivating a desire for further stillness of mind. Cultivate an appreciation for the peacefulness and serenity of a still mind. And naturally, the mind will incline towards deeper stillness. Okay. Anything else?
Luciana from Facebook is asking, is Satara Satipatthana part of the Eightfold Path? How they become related to each other?
Chattara Satipatthana, the four Satipatthana, four foundations of mindfulness.
Oh, okay, maybe that's, yeah. Is that Sanskrit? Have you wrote it or something?
I don't know how he wrote it because I can't see the screen.
Okay.
But yeah, the four Satipatthana, the four establishments of mindfulness. So the four establishments of mindfulness, actually the jhanas are mentioned under the fourth category. But the practice of mindfulness is a critical element of developing samadhi. So without mindfulness, there's no samadhi. Mindfulness is a critical component in the development of samadhi. You have to be mindful of your meditation object in order to have samadhi. If there's no mindfulness of the meditation object, then your mind will be blurry, hazy, unclear, dull. So you'll never get even first jhana without strong mindfulness. So yeah, satipatthana is a very important element of practicing samadhi. Okay, anything else?
So Gita also asks, should one contemplate the Dhamma after one emerges from any of these mind states with noble wisdom?
If you want to, yeah. I mean, it's pretty much always wholesome to contemplate the Dhamma. But what we really want to do when the mind is in that deeply peaceful and alert state, try to directly feel what the Dhamma is pointing to. Try to directly feel the impermanence of all phenomena. Try to directly feel the impersonal nature of all phenomena. See directly that nothing is worth holding on to, that nothing is worth seeking out. So we're trying to cultivate a wordless, non-verbal realization of the essence of the Buddha's words. And in samadhi, you have the optimal mental conditions for that. So when you have that kind of strong samadhi, try to feel the Dhamma, not just think about it. Feel it with your entire body and mind. Taste the Dhamma. Okay? And then afterwards, if you want to sit around and think about the Dhamma, that's also great, because thinking about the Dhamma is how you figure out how to feel the Dhamma. But when you've got that strong samadhi with that silent, sharp mind, try to feel the Dhamma. You might be surprised at how deep it goes. Okay? Anything else?
There's 2 other comments, but perhaps there's also questions from the live audience.
Yes.
So the last 3 things mentioned in that sutta were the 3 knowledges. And the third knowledge, curious about the detail of it. So what was the exact wording, mental liberation?
Yeah, so it says, with the elimination of my corruptions, may I attain and dwell in the corruption-free, wisdom-based mental liberation, having realized it with my own higher knowledge.
So is that a euphemism or positive nirvana?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that just a state distinct from nirvana?
So Drew is asking if this is talking about nibbana or if it's a state distinct from nibbana. So that's actually getting into a whole other topic, which is a topic about what is the nature of nibbana, which is another thing I like to talk about, but that's quite a long and in-depth topic, which I don't really think we have time for right now. But if you send me an email, we'll put it on a topic list. Yeah. Anything else?
I had a question, actually. So in the passage on the 4th jhana, in your translation, you say, when a monk abandons both pleasure and pain, elation and depression have previously disappeared. It's interesting to me because pain and depression appear for the first and last time here. Mm-hmm. What's the Buddha pointing at when speaking about these 2?
So in actuality, pain and depression have already disappeared before 1st jhana. So attaining 1st jhana, pain and depression are already gone. But they have been replaced by euphoria and happiness. So through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd jhana, you have this very euphoric, pleasant, happy state of mind, which is why it's not possible for pain and depression to be present. So when you're getting into 4th jhana, that euphoria and pleasure is completely gone. So I think the Buddha here specifies, just to make it clear, that the euphoria and pleasure isn't replaced by pain and depression, because the pain and depression are already gone as well. So I think he's just emphasizing that. It's not like you go through 3 stages of pleasure and then you get to pain. He's like, you go through 3 stages of pleasure and then you get to something even better, which is equanimity. So that's my interpretation as to why he makes it just explicitly clear. There's no pain and depression in 4th jhana. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And then Melody said, now I know what the white clothes are for. When during one of my pujas I attended in Singapore, a volunteer from the company puja will choose a few women from the room to wear clothes, white clothes, and send down food offerings to the hungry spirits in high realms.
Cool. That's great. Yeah, I had actually never made that connection before. But it's been a tradition since the time of the Buddha that when lay people go to the monastery, they often wear white clothing. And it represents purity of mind. But actually, until you just pointed it out, it had never occurred to me that that also lines up with the Buddha's simile about 4th jhana. So that's an interesting observation. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
And Ian says, Bhante, one of the 5 strengths is samadhi. Do the other 4 then have their own aspects listed as well? The way that Samādhi has these.
The other 5 spiritual powers, you mean?
He says strengths, but he says pancha balani.
Yeah, bala can also be translated strength. I mean, the Buddha goes into a lot of detail about each of the other 4 balas. I mean, I don't think he applies exactly the same 5-factored examination to them. But there might be some suttas where he does that I just don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, he goes into a lot of detail about all of the other 4. Oh.
And Gita says, pure tears of joy listening to this wonderful sutta.
Oh.
And lots of other thank yous. Ian also says, I think he means the eradication, but he said the education of euphoria would be upekkha. Maybe
Yeah. Upekkha is equanimity. So it's more that when one turns one's attention towards complete stability and serenity of mind, then euphoria loses its appeal. There's no longer that interest in cultivating this exciting, pleasant sensation. So when one's interest is in a peaceful, stable mind, then one just naturally loses interest in excitement of mind. So the excitement of euphoria is important in the early stages because it helps us let go of sensual desire. It helps us turn our mind from an unwholesome state to a wholesome state. It helps us to collect and gather the mind around the samadhi practice. But as our samadhi deepens and develops, then that exciting euphoric sensation becomes unnecessary and ultimately becomes a bit distracting. So naturally we lose interest in it and drop it and just focus on the stability of mind. Okay.
And then Bhavani has a question that's seemingly unrelated. How do Pacceka Buddhas practice? Do they also practice the Buddha's teachings?
So tomorrow evening, we have monk chat, which is your opportunity to ask all of your off-topic questions. So write that one down and ask it during monk chat.
And Dan Jones says, are the deeply weird experiences that seem real and beyond imagination jhana?
That sounds more like dreaming, which is not jhana. Jhana is not weird. It's great, but it's not weird. It's only weird if you're not used to being happy. Then I guess it's weird. But no, jhana is not weird. Jhana is actually phenomenally normal. Anything else?
Not from YouTube. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning for another sutta study. So tomorrow we'll have another sutta study with Bhante Pamuto, and then monk chat in the evening. So I think.
No, Ayasoma tomorrow.
Oh.
This evening.
That's what it is. So this evening, Bhante Pamuto will be giving a Dharma talk, and tomorrow morning, Ayasoma will be sharing a sutta. And in the evening, you'll be able to ask all your unrelated or still related but unasked questions during monk chat. So hopefully we'll see you then. We can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu,
sadhu, sadhu.
Enjoy the rest of your day.